Okay, so let's look at the leaves while I talk to you about butterflies, our longing for justice, and the beginning of life. I saw a video that talked about an investigation conducted by a Japanese kid. It all started when he wondered if the butterflies he was friends with could recognize him from their previous stage as caterpillars. So, to figure that out, he gave the caterpillars and himself electric shocks and associated this stimulus with the smell of lavender. And of course, he had two groups, the electrocuted caterpillars and the control group. Once they all became butterflies, the kid developed a test which consisted of a Y-shaped tube like a maze, and in both arms of the Y there was sugar water, and one side was only sugar water and the other side was sugar water, and it also had a piece of fabric, I think, with the smell of lavender. And so almost every butterfly that as caterpillar received an electric shock chose the lavender free path, while the control group was almost equally distributed between both paths. So that's the basic experiment. Butterflies remembered their lives as caterpillars, which is amazing because most of us don't remember our lives as fetuses. But the coolest thing is what happened next. When he replicated the maze part of the experiment with the offsprings, the proportion of path choice maintained. And then he repeated it with the next generation. And guess what? The grandchildren basically inherited the aversion to lavender. I loved learning about this experiment so much because I felt like it validated a lot of things I've been thinking about. So my question for scientists is this related to epigenetics? As I understood it, epigenetics is when your environment or when you have a very strong experience or the same emotion again and again, then your gene expression can change. So I wonder if that's what happened to the second and third generation of butterflies. Could lavender aversion be a different gene expression, or is just an inherited behavior, or I don't know. So I asked my brother, who is a marine biologist, so he knows more science than I do. And he said that to know that you would have to analyze the genetic code of the butterflies. So if you're a scientist watching this, please figure it out so you can tell me. Thank you. Or maybe there's already research about it. Please let me know. And this leads me to another question I have, which is kind of a tangent. So evolutionary psychology is a very interesting field, but it has kind of a bad reputation. Could epigenetics be a more quantitative approach toward that topic? Could those disciplines work together to figure out why we are how we are? It would be really cool if you could, dear scientist, share your opinion about it. Because I don't want to talk about these things to ChatGPT, or I might end up hallucinating or spiraling into delusion and become crazier than I am. Okay, so let's go back to the official list of topics. We already talked about butterflies. Now now let's talk about myths. So, myths are stories that try to explain the origin of the cosmos, the creation of humans, and natural phenomena. I feel the topic of myths has what I consider to be a negative connotation of not being true. What I think is that every myth has some truth in it, and that truth is what preserves them through the passing of time. So I use this concept of myth to refer to the Big Bang and Genesis equally. So the science myth of origin, also known as the Big Bang, tells us that in the beginning, although some people think the beginning was actually the end of the previous universe, but let's focus on the simpler version. In the beginning, there was a huge explosion that triggered a chain reaction from which the universe and life originated. The theory of Big Bang was first suggested by Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian mathematician, astronomer, and physics professor who also happened to be a Catholic priest. I love that so many priests are scientists. It's so cool. Do you know that the father of genetics, Gregor Mendel, was also Catholic? A friar, an Augustinian friar. So explosions. Explosions are very interesting. They can be beautiful, as in New Year's Eve, or scary, as in German New Year's Eve. They can be the starting point for a whole universe, or deadly to innocent civilians. And that is one of the most unfair things we still have. Millions of people losing their lives fighting wars so a few can get richer and richer, profiting from it. My point was that the world is so crazy right now that I don't even want to name every awful thing that is happening because we all know, but also because thinking and talking about those things makes me so angry and frustrating and also a little afraid. I've noticed through my abundant internet consumption that there's this widely spread feeling of frustration and like helplessness because it's so clear that the people responsible for this chaos are not going to be held accountable. And that sense of being powerless against our own governments can be overwhelming and draining. I don't think we are powerless, but I also don't think justice is totally possible, like fully perfect justice. Justice means that everyone receives what they are due. Laws and judicial systems are supposed to serve that goal. My controversial opinion is that I don't think giving everyone what they are due is humanly possible. We can try, and we should try, of course, but it will never be enough. It will never be done fully. Firstly, because of concupiscence, which means our tendency toward corruption and evil. But that is not my main reason. I think it's impossible because each human is so complex, yet our perception and intelligence is limited. We inherit so much from our ancestors and develop so many other characteristics through our environment that each one of us has such particular and specific combination of needs that would be fair to satisfy, but are impossible for us humans to calculate and compare in order to distribute resources. And I think those ethical dilemmas, like it's wrong to steal, but is it okay to steal a loaf of bread to feed your starving family, are an honest attempt to balance the objective ethical value and the ideal and the subjective situation. And the more I learn about the different layers we have, the genetic code we inherit, the psychological baggage or even trauma, the habits, the beliefs, all of that, plus the constant information we consume, the experiences we accumulate, our interests, etc., there's so much that influences our decisions and needs that how can you measure all of that to provide perfect justice through a courtroom or a social system? And that brings me to the other myth that we are discussing today. The one related to the person that sees it all and knows it all, the one capable to fully measure each and every variable and provide perfect justice. I don't know if you are familiar with this myth of origin, so I will read the first 3 verses. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless wasteland, and darkness covered the abyss, while a mighty wind swept over the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The way I see it is that it's not Big Bang or Genesis, although I prefer St. John. It's both. I went to a Catholic school and we used to have religion as a subject. It was very fun because it wasn't a real subject, but we still had our textbook. I don't remember what year it was or what grade I was in. There was this article, or maybe it was just a paragraph, I don't remember. But I swear I've got a point. I just don't know if all this context was necessary to say anyway. Anyway, there was a picture of Shrek to illustrate that we are just like onions. Because in the first movie, I think he said that to Donkey, that he was like an onion. And I agree. We have different layers, like a biological layer, psychological, and in the center, spiritual. And that must have created a very strong neural pathway because all these years later, I've been thinking about that, and I believe the universe is like an onion as well. Everything is like an onion. Although those Russian dolls are maybe a prettier image for that idea, more poetic. But onion is, well, it was just memorable. I never forgot it. So the Big Bang and the Genesis are just different layers. Genesis shows how God acts through His Word, that the universe is in God, but God is outside of the universe, and He doesn't depend on it. And the Big Bang explains the physical and chemical process that our material perception and intellect allows us to notice and imagine and calculate. So one's spiritual, one's physics. But I don't think they contradict each other because they are referring to different layers of reality. So they relate to symbols in a different way. And I hope we can talk about symbols in another video soon. And so this is how my understanding integrates both origin myths, our longing for justice and butterflies. In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's St. John. So the true beginning is before the beginning of our universe. Much like in any human project, the beginning is not really when you start working on it, but earlier, when you have an idea, contemplate it, and decide to do it. And then God said, "Let there be light." And with that breath and will, He set everything in motion, and there was light, a big explosion that allowed so much energy to spread. That single point from which the universe began is where and when God touched this dimension by creating it through His Word. And I think that breath of God, that spoken word, that will, that touch, left an imprint that was inherited by everything that came after. And I believe that conception is another burst of light when God touches a soul by creating it directly. Because the participation of the creative power of God is with Him. So why wouldn't we be directly touched by Him in that moment? And I believe we all have that distant memory of God, like that pulse for life, that survival instinct of the lonely cell, its wisdom to allow what comes in or out, and the order of every microscopic detail in our organism, even the parasites and germs surrounding us. I believe all human tendency toward justice, toward good and truth and beauty comes from that memory and the desire to reunite. The Catholic Catechism says, "The desire for God is written in the human heart because man is created by God and for God, and God never ceases to draw man to Himself." And I must admit it, I've read this line before. I went to catechism, I went to Catholic school and everything, but I found it so cheesy that I don't know, it was like, yeah, hard to believe. But the more I experience, the more it seems just reasonable. If butterflies can remember their friends or the smell of lavender, how could the greatest love, the fountain of all love, not be remembered by our huge brains?